Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining me on this talk, and thanks to Richard and Simon for inviting me here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about my challenge this summer to see a different butterfly species in each of London's 33 boroughs. Just to let you know what's coming up, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me, my background, what my experiences have been, what the inspiration for the challenge was, where I got the idea from, how I came up with it, bit about the planning and the approach, how I went about those early stages. I'm then going to focus in on the Surrey and South West London boroughs and the butterflies that I found there, and then give a short little summary at the end. So who am I? I'm a nature reserves officer. I work for London Wildlife Trust on the Brilliant Butterflies project, which is a partnership project between London Wildlife Trust, Butterfly Conservation and the Natural History Museum. And it focuses on restoring and creating chalk grassland habitats across the boroughs of Croydon and Bromley. I'll be giving another talk on that in March, so hopefully some of you can join for that too. The project has meant that I've spent large amounts of time in some of the most butterfly-rich areas of London in Croydon and Bromley, and that was perhaps lulled me into a bit of a false sense of security, as that was my baseline for thinking about butterflies in London. But I'm quite glad I had that as my baseline, as if I hadn't, I might not have chosen to go ahead with the challenge. I've listed there that I'm also a newcomer. As probably 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't know anything about butterflies, could maybe only ID 1 or 2, hadn't been out looking for them. And it was only as kind of taking an extra interest. I was working in education at the time and then stopped that and had a career change, started volunteering for London Wildlife Trust, got involved with my local transept, which is on Streatham Common. And that's where the journey began. So a big part of this challenge was also trying to inspire other people to start their own butterfly spotting journey and to try and find the same joy from it as I've had, and see how easy it is, and get out into their local green spaces and see what they could find there. So the inspiration for the challenge: coming out of the winter lockdowns at the beginning of the year, felt very much like coming out of hibernation. This is a fairly accurate representation of me at that time. Not really feeling like I felt motivated to do anything, needed a challenge. And I was reflecting on a talk that was given by Simon Saville on the success of London's butterflies, how although butterflies are declining nationally, in London they're somewhat of a success story, in that we have quite a lot more species present in the inner London boroughs than we used to have. And that was led me some more further research on from this book, which was produced during the 1980s by Colin Plant, and listed that there were 22 breeding species of butterfly in the 12 inner London boroughs. And now that's quite a different story. You can see far more different species than you could then, and the distribution of them is far wider. So thinking about that, and then also taking further inspiration from Patrick Barkham's wonderful book, The Butterfly Isles, where he spends a summer trying to see all 59 species of British butterfly. And I was reflecting on whether I could try and replicate that somehow in London. And that's how I came up with the 33 butterfly challenge, to try and explore just how diverse the butterflies had become and how far and wide they'd been spread across the capital. And also just to challenge myself to get out and see new green spaces, because I sort of, like a lot of people, perhaps just visiting the same ones, the familiar ones, and there's something nice about that, but also wanting to have that motivation to get out and explore new places. So this is London, to give you an idea of scale. These are the 32 boroughs, and there's the slight anomaly which I've highlighted there in red. That's the City of London, which is sometimes considered a borough and sometimes not. But for the purposes of my challenge, I decided to include it, mostly because 33 makes a far nicer butterfly-shaped logo than 32 would have done. To give you an idea of size, it's about 45 miles across from Hillingdon to Havering, so it's quite a large area to be exploring. And this pink outline just shows those 12 inner London boroughs, so the boroughs where during the 1980s there was 22 breeding species of butterfly. And this yellow outline just shows the boroughs covered by Surrey and South West London butterfly conservation, so roughly about a quarter of the capital, so quite a large area to be considering. I'll be honest and say that I didn't know that there were 33 boroughs in London before I started this challenge, despite having lived here for the past 8 years. So it was an eye-opener to find out about the different boroughs and how they came about. And if anyone's interested in learning about the history of boroughs and why they're called what they're called and how they came about, I really recommend Jay Foreman's YouTube videos. He presents it in a really entertaining way and explains everything about the history. So I would recommend those if you're interested in that. So I spent a lot of time at the beginning of the year researching butterfly records, poring over the data on UK BMS and the UK Butterfly Monitoring Service, and also looking at old transept records and trying to pinpoint where specific species were recorded. And so I created this vast spreadsheet of the species and started thinking about the green spaces I would visit. And because I was working full time and fitting the challenge in around that, this was just a pastime. I started looking at the borough border areas so that I could try and hit maybe 2 or 3 boroughs in one visit. And so once I'd kind of plotted all that out and cross-referenced all of these, I had this big spreadsheet, as I said, and I was feeling really buoyed up. I was ready to go. I was like, it's going to be hard. I knew that, but I thought it was just about possible. So I got very excited in late March when, if you'll cast your minds back, we had some beautiful weather. It was about 24 degrees in London. It was bright sunshine. I thought, this is going to be the best butterfly year ever. You know, the challenge is going to be a piece of cake. I'll have it completed in no time. So it was very good. And then came April, which was a slight turn in the weather, shall we say, in that it was the coldest since 1922. And as you all know, butterflies don't really like coming out in the cold weather. I thought, it's only April, it's fine, it's the first month of the butterfly season, you know, following the beast from the east in 2018. We then had a really good butterfly year, so I thought it's fine, you know, come May the weather's going to turn. It's just getting all the cold weather out of its system to start with. And then came May and it was the wettest since records began, in fact. So the seeds of doubt had sort of started to creep in at this point about whether I would be able to complete the challenge. It sounds weird, but I hadn't really thought about the weather and how much that would impact the challenge at the beginning. I was, you know, just sort of so excited by all the different species I might see. That said, there were a few glimmers of hope within April and May, and a few sunny days where I was able to get out. And the first of those was to my local patch in Lambeth on Streatham Common. It's a really beautiful green space, and one that I visit regularly. Is one of those ones, like I said, that I would sort of rely on that as my top up of green space. And it really is a really beautiful area. It's the sort of main area of the common is more sort of amenity grassland. As you head up the slopes, you get really varied habitats. And there's a really lovely formal garden called the Rookery, which was the grounds of an old house that used to be one of the historic mineral wells that are dotted around southwest London, sort of up towards Spa Hill, where sort of the rich would come and enjoy their spa treatments in the mineral wells. It's got some beautiful old cedar trees. You can see one in the background of this picture here with the sunflowers in the foreground. It's got rock gardens and beautiful little pond areas, and there's a really active volunteer group who look after it a lot of the time. And there's a area called the White Garden, which is a former kitchen garden, and is always a great place to see the white butterflies in particular. Next door to that is some meadow areas that are managed as meadows. It's a really great place to see marbled whites, which were previously very much not a city butterfly at all. Were restricted to very outer areas, but is now a butterfly that you can see in several areas in London. And as you might expect, I saw lots of meadow browns, and it's where I took my favourite video from the challenge. I really got into doing slow motion videos of butterflies during the summer, and this was my favourite, I think, that I filmed. So if you just have a look at the very top of the screen, you should hopefully see an incoming visitor. So it's just a really lovely chance encounter, and the challenge was peppered with interactions like this. And it might be the sort of cry of the butterfly spotters, oh, it's just a meadow brown, just a meadow brown. But because of the approach that I was taking to try and visit each borough and try and see as many species as I could in that borough, and then figure out where, try and assign one to each borough at the end. So I wasn't going to one borough for each butterfly. I was just trying to see as many as I could. And so every butterfly counted. I was always pleased to see whether it was a meadow brown or one of the more rarer species. So it really was a good chance to just try and appreciate all the species that were present in London. And the tick that actually came about for Streatham Common, for Lambeth, was the brimstone, which is up in this top left corner. And I'll just talk a bit more about their sort of history within London. So the brimstones were generally considered not to be a very city-dwelling butterfly during the 1980s. And in fact, you can see that direct quote there from Colin Plant's book. They avoid the urban area completely. And that pink line is the inner, showing again the inner London boroughs. You can see it's very sparsely populated with those dots that show where brimstones were recorded. So he was right at that time that they really did avoid the urban area. And brimstones nationally are not doing too well in the big butterfly count this year. They were down 33% on previous years. But looking at a broader picture for London and the last few years, this diagram just shows the inner London borough records. There's that pink line again. And you can see how many more records we're seeing these days than as compared to the 1980s. It's quite interesting to see that Streatham Common, which I've highlighted in red there, has always been a stronghold for the brimstone. So I was quite glad to have that as my tick for the area, because it shows that they're a long-standing population of butterflies, but that they've also spread far and wide across the city. And a few other places there I've highlighted in yellow. We've got just north from Streatham Common is Tooting Common, where I also saw brimstones. Heading north again, that's Burgess Park, and then St James's Park. And lots of these urban parks have done tree planting, where they've planted buckthorn and older buckthorn, which are the food plants of the brimstone larvae. So it shows that the work that's taking place is really having an impact on helping the distribution of butterfly species. Moving on to one of my all-time favourite butterflies, the green hairstreak. It's this little wing wiggler on the left-hand side here and in those other pictures. It has a usual flight period throughout May, but thanks to the dreadful weather that I mentioned earlier, by the last week or so of May, I hadn't seen any, and I was starting to worry that perhaps I wouldn't see any, I wouldn't catch sight of any in the city this year. But luckily I had a call out to butterfly friends, and came up trumps, and Bill Downey, who's here tonight, put me in touch with a man of means in terms of green hairstreaks. He manages part of Richmond Park, and had a surefire place for me to see them. And so I visited. Of course, on the day that I visited, the clouds came over, and it was fairly miserable. So after about 45 minutes of staring at the usually reliable patch of green alkanet, where they'd been seen every day in the previous 3 or 4 days leading up to it, I was about to admit defeat when a sliver of sunshine just broke through the clouds, and up shot the unmistakable sight of a green hairstreak as it fluttered past our noses. And in the butterfly aisles, Patrick Barkham would often be on a site and be there for quite a while, and about to give up on seeing a species, when all of a sudden it would appear. So this definitely felt like a Barkham moment for me to catch this green hairstreak in Richmond. And Richmond is acknowledged to be the greenest borough in London, largely thanks to Richmond Park and Bushy Park. And it has about 26 species that they record on Transect. And I'll come back to that in a while to kind of compare it with some of the more inner London boroughs and the species that they find there. Just have a look at green hairstreaks and their distribution across the city. So these 3 pictures that you can see here, they were all various sites across the capital where I saw green hairstreaks this year, because thankfully the sunshine came in June, and suddenly there was a burst of green, and I saw more this year than I've ever seen. So again, just to show you the diagram for green hairstreaks in the 1980s, recorded by Colin Plants. There were none recorded in the inner London boroughs, and quite sparsely populated in the outer London boroughs, mostly concentrated in the south. It's acknowledged to be the most widely distributed hairstreak species of the hairstreaks that we have in Britain. But I think probably the purple hairstreak will have overtaken that now in London. And with the new survey techniques that were introduced this year, whereby the purple hairstreaks are monitored at the time you're more likely to see them, which is in the evening time, hopefully that will help to confirm that and just see how far spread the purple hairstreaks have become. This is the new records for the green hairstreaks. So not quite as many records as for the Brimstones, but you can see there's clear records within those inner London boroughs. And I think the fact that the green hairstreak has more than one food plant, it will feed on broom, gorse, bird's foot trefoil, bramble, even. I think that's helping it spread into more urban parks. The places where I saw the green hairstreaks this year, so that was the green circle there is in Richmond, and I also saw them in Beckenham Place Park, Wandsworth Flats, and in areas of Croydon and Bromley as well. So moving on to Croydon, my favourite site, I think, to see butterflies, just because I have a strong affinity with it, having done quite a lot of work on the site. So this is Hutchinson's Bank, which is in New Addington. And it's a site I'm unashamedly biased about, but it really is a butterfly paradise. It's a chalk grassland reserve managed by London Wildlife Trust since 1986, and it has help from the Downlands Partnership sheep, and it regularly records between 35 and 40 species on transect. So the Glanville fritillaries is the butterfly species that are found there, and during May and that early part of the butterfly season. They're often spoken about in hushed tones because they're a species that were released about 10 years ago, but they now seem to be an established population doing well. So people come from far and wide to see them sort of throughout their flight period. You jostle for space in an area known as the Cutting, which is a hotspot for them, with photographers wanting to catch a glimpse of these beautiful butterflies. The great thing about Glanvilles is that they are fairly docile. They will sit for ages while you take pictures of them. So that's how I got these two shots in the bottom left-hand corner here. They're quite happy just to perch while you move around them, and they're not at all skittish. So they're quite a nice butterfly to photograph. One that's less docile and far more flighty is this on the right-hand side, the grizzled skipper, which is another butterfly found at Hutchinson's Bank, and was one of the species that I only saw in Croydon and Bromley. So it wasn't one that I saw far and wide, and actually didn't make the final cut of the 33, but it really is a beautiful, delicate species. And I'll just tell you a little bit more about Hutchinson's Bank. So you can see here on the map on the left-hand side, this is Hutchinson's Bank. It's found in New Addington, and it's sort of quite a steep sloped site. Those pale green areas show the meadow areas, many of which are grazed by sheep. The olive green there is the scrub areas, and the dark green woodland. So it's got this real variety of habitats, and because of the kind of undulating slopes and the area that I mentioned called the Cutting, which should have been the continuation of that road you can see cutting into the site on the left hand side, that's Farley Dean Crescent, which was supposed to be a crescent, but was stopped because of the war, and then with post-war legislation about the green belt, the crescent was no longer a crescent, it was half a crescent, thankfully. But the planned road route was still cut through, so it's now quite a nice microclimate for butterflies due to its steep-sided slopes and the scrapes that have been created there. The scrapes are areas where we take back the fertile topsoil to allow the chalk grassland plants to thrive. They rely on low nutrient soil that warms up quickly and drains water quickly. So several of them have been created across the site, some large-scale ones most recently as part of the Brilliant Butterflies project. So those can be found on a bottom area of the site, quite close to where that dark green woodland area is. So these butterflies on the right hand side are 4 of the also rans in the challenge. So they're ones that I saw in the summer but that didn't make the final 33 because I only saw them in boroughs where I'd seen other butterflies and got a tick for them. So this first one on the left hand side at the top there is the small blue, and it's Britain's smallest butterfly, really dainty little butterfly, quite almost like denim grey, I would say, rather than a blue. And they're nationally quite rare, and that's their own fault because they are monophagous. They only have their larvae only have one food plant, and that's the kidney vetch, which grows only on chalk grassland. So it's doing quite well in Croydon, and Hutchinson's Bank is a real hotspot for this species. And we often have clouds and crowds of them around their patches of chalk, particularly on those scrape areas that I mentioned. Next door to it there on the right is the Chalk Hill Blue, which is a really stunning turquoise butterfly. As the name would suggest, it's also a chalk specialist, and the larvae feeding on horseshoe vetch. Seemed to be quite a good year for them this year, the second highest count in the last 5 years, and I certainly saw more than I've ever seen. And the males in particular that are pictured here, really striking. We've got the dark green fritillary, which is on the left-hand side at the bottom there. They feed on violet, and the sister site to Hutchinson's Bank, just across Featherbed Lane, the road that runs along the bottom of the site, Chapel Bank, is one of the best places to see dark green fritillary. It's got one area in particular that's really rich for them. It's got plenty of thistle and knapweed that they really seem to favour. They love balancing on these purple flower heads. And next door to that on the right is the silverwash fritillary, one of my favourite butterflies. It was the first fancy butterfly that I saw actually on Streatham Common. It's the only record of it there, but thankfully I managed to get a picture. And it's really a really stunning butterfly. One of the other sites that's part of the Brilliant Butterflies project in Coulsdon, Dollopus Hill, where we've done quite a lot of work, is absolutely one of the best places to see this butterfly. We have many individuals joining us for our volunteer days in the chalk meadow glades that are there. So I would really recommend a visit to Dollopus Hill during the summer months to catch sight of these silverwash fritillaries. It was a butterfly that I didn't see as many of as I thought I would. So it's not a common butterfly in the city, but there are lots of records of it in the outer London boroughs. But I didn't see many of them this year, so I don't know if that's something that's reflected nationally or if it was just sort of an anomaly year. I only saw them in Croydon, Bromley, and up in Hillingdon in Ruislip Woods. So I'm just going to... Just to mention as well about Hutchinson's Bank, you can see from this map just how urban the site is, how close to houses and the business area of New Addington it is. So we've spent a lot of work on the Brilliant Butterflies has been trying to draw people down onto the site for guided walks, for volunteer sessions, and we are starting to see an increased interest in the site now, which is great. So moving on to the next door neighbour borough to Croydon, Sutton, and a site that was new to me, even though I've driven past it on the Purley Way many times on the way to Croydon. I hadn't visited it until this summer, and that's Roundshaw Downs. It's right on the Sutton-Croydon border. The border actually bisects part of the site, and it's the site of a former Croydon airport, which was London's busiest airport during the 1920s and 30s, which is quite hard to imagine, but it's a really lovely area, not just for the green space, but there's lots of these old sort of 1920s Art Deco buildings surrounding that area as well. So it's a really great place to visit. And when walking around, it's quite easy to forget that you're in London because it's got quite a rural feel about it, particularly when they've got the cattle grazing, which they have several times throughout the year. But then you kind of look up and you catch sight of that skyline. You can just see in the distance there with the skyscrapers, the Shard, and very distinctive buildings poking through. But that serves as a reminder just how close you are to the heart of the city. It's chalk grassland meadows again, and it's managed by Sutton Council with the help of Sutton Conservation Volunteers and, as I mentioned, the cattle from the Downlands project. And lots of work has gone into restoring these chalk habitats, and enhancing them for butterflies. So they've also created scrapes similar to what we've done on Hutchinson's bank, and sowed kidney vetch to support the small blue population that started to grow there. And as part of the Brilliant Butterflies project, we've also installed some new banks and scrapes there most recently. So hopefully we should start to see those establishing and being real hubs for the butterflies in years to come. This year was a particularly good year, it seems, for the Dingy skipper, which was my tick for Sutton. It's the butterfly shown here in the bottom right-hand picture. Often described as the drabbest of British butterflies, and its brown colour doesn't really do it. But when you get up close to it, it really is quite a pretty species, and particularly in flight. It's got this sort of, as you would expect, a skipping flight. And it's thought that they did well this year. It had a warm, dry spring last year, which will have led to lots of egg laying. So then this year, in turn, lots of individuals were seen. I saw many on our sites in Croydon and Bromley, which sort of led me to Sutton to see if I could try and see them there. What I didn't realise at my time of visiting was that they hadn't been recorded on Roundshaw Downs until I saw them on the day that I was there. Thankfully, I got a photo record of the ones I saw, and it was only as I posted on Twitter about the sighting, and that one of the conservation volunteers sort of said, you know, are you sure? And I sent the picture, and it turns out that they're now on site. So hopefully they will have laid plenty of eggs, and next year we'll start to see a real growing population on this site. So it's again testament to the power of Twitter, of trying to kind of spread the word about butterfly sightings across the capital. They're not I'll just show you actually this map. Just shows you exactly where they are. So we've got Sutton, Roundshaw Downs. You can see the borough border there slicing through on the left-hand side. And I've just marked there the two of our London Wildlife Trust sites, Hutchinson's Bank on the far right and Riddlesdown Common, both of which places where I'd seen lots of dingy skippers. And so hence why I was thinking that perhaps this might be the year for them to spread across into Sutton. Which it was. But despite that, they're not a super success story like the Brimstones and the green Hairstreaks could be considered. This was the distribution diagram from the 80s, completely absent from the inner London boroughs and only really scattered around the outside. And it's a very similar story. I've zoomed out for this eye record image because it shows you that they really do stick to the chalk grassland habitats of the Chilterns in the north there and the North Downs, cutting across the bottom there. The larval food plant is bird's-foot trefoil, which is a relatively common plant seen on many grassland habitats, but it shows that they really do want it to be on chalk grassland. Perhaps for that bare ground, they like the areas of bare ground and the warm temperatures created by the chalky soil. So I don't think they're a species that are going to be spreading into inner London anytime soon. Moving on to His Imperial Majesty, the Purple Emperor. It was one of the species that I was least confident about being able to see in London. There aren't that many records of it, and that's partly due to its elusive nature. It's a treetop dweller, likes to be in the very top of oak trees, so it's quite difficult to spot. You can see here that in the 1980s there was few records, and there are increased records now in and around the capital. And Matthew Oates, who is the author of a wonderful book called His Imperial Majesty, all about the Purple Emperor, a bit of a biography of the Purple Emperor, and he describes them as a true London butterfly. So I looked in several places to try and see them, and this was where I was using Twitter to try and find out, doing a Purple Emperor London search on a daily basis throughout their flight period in July, just to see if there was any records that people were seeing, if there was any about. And I went to Ruislip Woods, which is in Hillingdon, a wonderful quite a large, I think the largest in London, swathe of ancient woodland. Really, really beautiful sight to walk around. And I know that they have purple emperors there. They've got lots of ancient oak trees, which are perfect habitat for them, as well as the sallow, which is where the females will lay their eggs. So it was a place where I went to hopefully see the purple emperors. I wasn't successful, but I did see White Admiral, which is another gorgeous butterfly, quite a tropical looking butterfly. It really glides. It wouldn't look out of place in the rainforest. So that was a really magical moment, seeing those in Ruislip Woods. And if you haven't been up to that kind of far corner, I certainly hadn't until this summer, I would really recommend a visit. Also that second circle there in the top, that's in Enfield. So I went to Totteridge Green in Enfield, where they had been seen. No joy. Hampstead Heath is another place where they can be seen within inner London, but I didn't have any success there. And the final place was Putney Heath in Wandsworth, an inner London borough. So a very exciting sighting. I had to turn into a little bit of a stalker to secure the sighting of His Majesty. As I said, I was scouring Twitter data, and I came across a post by Les Evans-Hill, who's a data manager for butterfly conservation, heavily involved in the National Moth Recording Scheme, and he'd had a purple emperor in his back garden, which backs onto Putney Heath. Thankfully, he didn't mind me sliding into his DMs and to ask him where he lived, so that I could come and see if I could spot it for myself. And he also didn't mind when I popped my head over his garden fence and I saw him in his back garden, and we had a chat, and he gave me some more pointers on where to see the purple emperor. And I spent about an hour exploring around the various places that he'd recommended on the heath. And as I was walking along one of the paths towards quite a busy junction of paths, I saw a butterfly that I didn't immediately recognise, and had a heart-stopping moment as I tried to get close enough to ID it, and it sort of fluttered up onto a beech tree. There was people with buggies and dogs milling around, and fluttered up, and I could say for sure that it was a purple emperor, and I did an audible yelp and a sort of leap into the air, and the buggy pushers and dog walkers sort of giving me a few strange looks, like what's this crazy girl doing? But I managed to get a photo of it on the beech tree, and I thought that might be it. That might be my only interaction, but it was sort of record shot, as they say. But then it fluttered down just underneath the beech tree, and I had about 20 delicious minutes of being nose to nose with this male purple emperor as he probed the ground. You can see from this picture at the bottom here, they've got these magnificent yellow proboscises that probe the ground. They'll often come down in the mornings to try and get salts from the ground and from dog poo and other various gross things. But yes, I'll just show you a little video. This was not zoomed in at all. It was my interaction while he pottered about under the beech tree, completely unfazed by me. But just, you can see there the beautiful purple colour as the sun catches his wings. There was a few dogs came quite close by as I was sitting there. I had to kind of shove them out the way and just spend those moments in enjoying that interaction. And then it fluttered off to be seen no more. And I was absolutely buzzing at this point. I was by myself, so I didn't have anybody to kind of share this buzz with. And just so happened, as I was walking away, I spotted two gentlemen. One of them was carrying a butterfly transect recording sheet. I was like, oh, there's some of my people. And I kind of, raced up to them I was like, are you spotting butterflies? And we had it turned out they were doing the transect at that point, and they hadn't seen purple emperors, but they had seen clouded yellows, which is this butterfly pictured here at the top of the screen, a migrant that visits every year into Britain, or most years, and so that was another butterfly that I wasn't sure whether I'd be able to see in the capital. So it was a great chance encounter, having seen the purple emperors, to then be able to meet these people who pinpointed me to another species that I might be able to see. So I was then able to sort of walk further down on the site to catch sight of clouded yellows fluttering about in the wildflower meadows, on what turned out to be Wimbledon Common. I'll just show you, this is a map of the area of Putney Heath and Wimbledon Common. And you can see the purple star there is where I saw the Purple Emperor. And the pink line is the border that is separating Wandsworth in the north, Putney Heath, and Merton in the south, which is where I saw the clouded yellows. But when I returned from seeing the Purple Emperor, I recorded everything as Putney Heath and being in Wandsworth, and it was only several weeks later when I was sort of scouring areas and looking at border green spaces and thinking about getting my ticks for Merton that I realised that it was actually in Merton that I'd seen the clouded yellows, and that was a good realisation, because if I hadn't, then it would have meant I wouldn't have been able to achieve the whole challenge. So thank goodness for Google Maps, that's for sure. And moving on to Southwark, it's to the Centre for Wildlife Gardening, which is another London Wildlife Trust site. It's a small little wildlife garden in East Dulwich, and it was the site where I saw the skipper that you can see here became the large skipper became the tick for Southwark. It's a really nice little hotspot for butterflies in this small area surrounded by houses. But I also wanted to talk about another site in Southwark that I visited, which is Burgess Park, which is pictured here, the wildflower meadows there, pictured in the top left-hand corner. And it really is a shining example of what can be achieved in an urban green space. The park's named after Camberwell's first female mayor, who spearheaded post-war campaigns to provide green spaces in central London. And Burgess Park really rose from the rubble of bomb-damaged buildings to become known as Southwest London's green lung. Large areas of the park have been rewilded to provide wildflower mounds and meadows. It's got woodland, it's got lake. A lot of time and effort has gone in. They've got a really active volunteer group there, and you can really see that the difference that's been made in terms of the wildlife. And Southwark isn't, a supremely green borough, and to come back to comparing it with the greenest borough in Richmond, where, as I mentioned, they get 25 species of butterfly on transect, but in Burgess Park they also get a similar number of butterflies on transect, which I think is a real testament to the quality of green space. So it doesn't matter where it is, you don't have to have these swathes of green space. All these pockets across the capital can be rewilded and up-leveled to meet the needs of the wildlife, but also the community. They've got this vast heritage trail across Burgess Park, which really celebrates its history and gives so much information about where the areas come from, how the kind of beginnings of the park, and it's a real pleasure to walk around there and just be a part of that. It's got a rich, part of its history is with another butterfly called the Camberwell Beauty, which was captured near the site. So they've got this beautiful butterfly mural, a mosaic of the Camberwell Beauty, which came from one of the industrial buildings that was there years ago. So there's all these little nuggets of information that you can glean from walking around there as well. It's a stronghold for marbled whites, which, as I mentioned earlier, very much used to be considered an outlier, not within the urban environment, along with this butterfly here, the brown Argus, both species classically associated with meadows, chalk grassland in particular, but now really making a spread across the city and seen in boroughs that are supremely urban. Moving on to the final piece of the puzzle, it relied on another bit of butterfly intel from Bill Downey, who pinpointed me to a specific blackthorn hedge in Tolworth Court Farm Fields to try and find the brown hairstreak. And Tolworth Court Farm Fields have been farmland for hundreds of years. They're pictured here in the central picture. They've got several ancient trees, these standard trees, old oak trees, and also it's crisscrossed with this network of hedges, which which includes a large amount of blackthorn, which the brown hairstreak relies on, particularly the young blackthorn growth. And this area was a really rich variety of wildlife here. It gets about 26 species of butterfly on their transect. Suffered a bit recently with neglect, but there's really exciting plans. Citizen Zoo are planning to do a large-scale rewilding of this area. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can achieve there. So as I say, I was pinpointed to this specific hedge, and almost exactly on the point where Bill had dropped a Google Map pin was where I managed to get my gold at the end of the challenge rainbow and see the brown hairstreak butterfly. I was cock-a-hoop at that, so like really hopping for joy that I'd managed. It was the final borough to see. Everything hinged on seeing this last species. It's one of the last species to appear in the year, sort of September species, and so I was really delighted to catch sight of one in Kingston and complete the challenge. But then the real icing on the cake was came the following day when I happened to be walking home past Tooting Common about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And there was a brown hairstreak just fluttering next to the path, next to a very busy road. This bottom picture here on the left-hand side shows the road, and that red arrow is pointing to where the brown hairstreak was, just pottering about in these blackthorn bushes, right next to a very busy road. And I managed to get a little video. You can see the contrast from its underwings and its upper wings as it flies away, flashing those lovely gold underwings with the brown on top. So it was a really great sighting, and also showed how much this butterfly is spreading across the capital. There was more sightings in southwest London this year than there's ever been before. They were popping up in all various new sites. You can see here that in the 1980s, very few records for the brown hairstreak in and around London, and none within those inner London boroughs. So it was a very scarce sighting. And then fast forward to 2019, 2021, you can see that there's far more sightings, particularly within the south, but also spreading into the north and across, starting to creep into those inner London boroughs there of Wandsworth and Lambeth. So really a butterfly that's definitely can be considered part of that success story of London. Okay, just to give a little summary, so I actually ended up saying 38 species in total. 27 of those were in inner London boroughs, so comparing that to the 22 that were considered to be part of that picture in the 1980s. Visited over 60 green spaces. Many of them were new to me, not places I'd visited before. I wrote blog articles for most of the places that I visited, or many of them. So those can be found on my blog. I'll give you an address for that in a moment. I wanted to say a huge thank you to the butterfly community. What an amazing community it is. I had so much help. Everyone was so positive. Even people who didn't think it was possible were still really supportive and really interested in finding out which butterflies I'd seen, which boroughs I'd been to. And I really wouldn't have been able to see those rarer species without the help from people telling me specific places to go, giving me tips and hints. So I'm so grateful for that. Another, one of my favorite phrases is motivation follows action, and it's like just basically start doing something and you'll never want to stop. You want to keep doing it, and you'll do more and you'll do more. And that certainly was true of the challenge. There was days when I really didn't want to go out, didn't feel like going out for various reasons. I always felt better for going out, even just on short visits. The butterflies always had the magic of cheering me up. Just my last note there on luck. I don't know if you believe in this, but I've spent my life looking for four-leaf clovers. Actually, every patch of clover I walk past, I have a little glance to see if I can see a four-leaf clover. I guess it's that sort of treasure hunt appeal again, similar to the butterfly challenge. And I'd never found one, and then this year I found two. One was in Bedford, which was the week before I saw the Purple Emperor and the White Admiral and the Clouded Yellow. And the second one was this one here, I found in Finsbury Park, which was a few days before I completed the challenge. So I'm a big believer in those kind of things. So I like to think that Lady Luck was on my side when I was doing this challenge. And just to finish, that's all 33 species that made it as part of the challenge. That's my blog just there if anyone wants to read any in further detail about any of the sites that I visited or the species that I saw, then please do. And just a huge thank you for joining me for this talk. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you can get out next year and try and see as many butterflies as you can in your local green spaces. I would encourage everybody to kind of set their own challenge, the 5 butterflies challenge. You start small and build up from there. That the more you look, the more you see, and it really is quite a wonderful thing to do.